illustrate this. And this is a case that occurred before Restart existed. So this is not somebody who came to Restart. I just worked with him in an outpatient setting. But he's a young man whose mother found me. He was 23 or 22 or 23 when she found me and he came. And his story is this. He had been a high school student who was good enough academically to get into UW. His parents allowed him to game, but he didn't game a great deal. His dad was very harsh with him. His mom was less so.
Oh, what year was this?
This is back in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Okay. And so he had a lot of anger toward his dad, and he had much more love for his mother. A lot of anger toward his dad. His parents were immigrants, and they were just trying to do the best that they knew how to do, but it left him, so he would, objectively, if you met him as a senior, you would say, this is a healthy guy, he runs track, he's got friends, he plays a little video game, he gets good grades, and he got into UW. So he went off to UW, but the first thing he did, he was in a dorm, the first thing he did is hook up with all the other gamers in the dorm. They started gaming, and that was it. He squeaked by in his grades the first semester, but from there on, he spent 3 years signing up and withdrawing. Signing up and withdrawing, and his parents had no clue what was going on, and he would create a fake transcript to show them. Okay? So he just fooled them into paying 3 years of tuition for nothing. The university finally sent them a letter saying, we're dropping your son, he's failed out. And that was the first they learned of it. Well, you can imagine how furious they were, right? And this harsh dad said, you're not my son anymore. He didn't want anything to do with him. And this young man had money saved up from when he was in high school and worked a job after school. And with those few $1,000s that he had saved, he began to live like a little poor church mouse, right? He had rented this hovel, and he just lived in front of his screen. He almost never went out. There is a term, I don't know if you know it, the hikikomori.
Yeah.
And he had become essentially a hikikomori, a shut-in, who wouldn't leave. And he would order pizza or Chinese. And they'd bring it and they'd deliver it to him, and he never really had to go out. And this is not who he was as a high school student, but this is who he became over time. And his money was running out, and that's why he was becoming suicidal. He could not imagine going into the world and working. He was terrified of facing the world and deeply ashamed. You can imagine how ashamed he was. So the one person he confided in was his mother. So his mother brought him to me. What made working with him easy was that he knew he was in trouble. I mean, he was not in denial about having a really serious problem. And so he wasn't willing to give it up. I advised him at the time. I said, this will all go quicker and you'll have an easier time of it if you'll just cut yourself off, go cold turkey from the gaming, live through it, and then you'll get to the other side of it and you'll start feeling better really fast. He couldn't do it. He could not imagine doing it. So he had to go through this long, slow, laborious process of cutting back, and then he'd cut back. It was this back and forth, but slowly he just had run out of money. He had to go to work. His first job was working in a factory where he built windows. And it was painful work. He was on his feet 12 hours a day. His hands were getting cut up from the glass and the metal. He hated it. So he said, okay, I don't want to do this work anymore. And he got himself a job at Microsoft testing games. Which is, my experience is a lot of game addicts really love that job, right? They get to go play games all day. But actually, he hated it. And it was really interesting. He said it was so boring, playing these games he couldn't stand, dealing with these glitches that were happening, he found it really frustrating. He didn't enjoy it a bit. And so finally he said, if I'm going to have a decent job, I have got to go back to the university and get my degree. So he applied again, and they said, we will only take you back, we'll only consider taking you back if you write us an essay about what happened and why we should take a chance on you. So he wrote an essay, a great essay, about what happened, about his game addiction and all that had transpired, and they said, okay, we'll take you back. And in fact, he succeeded. He discovered that during the semester, he had to leave his laptop at his parents' home because he couldn't resist the urge to game. So he just had to use the computers at the computer lab. It was the only way he could actually get his work done. The laptop was too much of a distraction. But he succeeded, and of course he was now funding his own education, right, taking out loans. His parents certainly were done with him. So he has plenty of loans, but he has graduated, he has a fine job, and now he's on to the next phase, which is figuring out how to date. Right. Because this is my other experience of gamers, is that they don't date. You know, they're caught up in their gaming, and they are caught up often using pornography for sexual release. And what's happened is that when you have a heavy diet of that, it separates sexuality and relationships. And so the gamers that I work with, they either just don't date, period, even though they like the idea of dating, but they don't know how to do it, they don't have confidence to do it, they haven't developed the skills for dating that you normally develop in high school. And so they are just relying on pornography. Or if they've made the jump into actual sex, it often is just hookup sex, right? No relationship. Just a quick sexual release with somebody you don't even necessarily know, and then, you're good to go. And so both of those are really fostered with a diet of pornography, because that's what pornography does. So my recommendation to all of you is give up the porn. Yes. Wait, you had a question first, and then I'll get to you. You had a question. Never mind. Okay, yeah.
Well, you said when you're in the program that they do a lot of CrossFit exercise.
Yeah.
And I know that exercise can release neurochemicals in
Yeah.
your brain.
Yeah, makes you feel better.
Do you ever see someone who replaces an old addiction with a new addiction?
Oh yes, that's common. But exercise is a difficult addiction to develop because you just are too worn out. It's not easy to work that hard that you actually get addicted to it. But yes, cross addiction is always something to be alert to. So if you give up let's say a gaming addiction and then you start drinking alcohol or smoking pot or something else. So yes, you have to be really alert to not letting yourself, or food, turning to food instead. So you, and then you, and then you.
Do you know what game the guy was playing that was really addicted?
He loved Counter-Strike. He had started off in EverQuest. He loved Counter-Strike, and then he got into World of Warcraft. Yeah, World of Warcraft. Yeah.
You have some kind of recommendation for how gamers should make the transition into dating?
It is, stop looking at porn, number one, if that's what you're doing. And then just learn to be friends. The first thing, because really the skill, dating, really requires knowing how to be a friend to a girl. And that means knowing how to just talk in a friendly way, but not initially in a sexual way. It's like girls want to be, that courtship process is really a process of getting to know each other. And, so you approach it as friends. And then down the road, if that friendship has developed and is going well, and you're attracted to her as more than just a friend, well, that's when you can begin suggesting a date that is more like a date. But the first thing is I would recommend just develop friendships with girls. Yeah.
First question I was going to ask was how treating for game addiction is different than for treating for other addictions. But I guess one question I had is it the social aspect, sort of the shutting yourself off from society? Is that sort of unique to the game?
It is. It is. There's a book that I can recommend to you all, a couple of books to recommend. One is called, it's just out, it's called I, as in small letter I, Disorder. I, Disorder. And it's interesting because Cosette and I will talk about the guys in our program as e-brainers. And what that really means is, that for the most part, these are guys who've been gaming and sitting in front of consoles since they were little. You know, since they were 5, 4, very, very young. And the result is a kind of a constellation of traits, of personality traits, that has to do, among other things, with being not very confident and not having necessarily very good social skills. And it's interesting because when you compare that population, that gamer population, with drug addicts and alcoholics, this is one of the really big differences. Like, drug addicts and alcoholics tend to do their drugs in social settings. They also tend to be kind of street smart. You know, they're out in the world, they develop confidence in how to get their drugs off the street corner, or you know, sneak around and get their alcohol, you know, talk somebody into buying their alcohol or whatever. And then they usually get together to drink it and smoke it and so forth. And they often are sexual. They're you know, in that social setting, they're also often sexual. So they're more confident in the world, confident in social settings, and maybe there's, you know, there often is a lot of skewed thinking and not necessarily healthy behavior, but more confidence. Whereas my experience of gamers is that they lack confidence about being in the world. They're more dependent on, they've been sitting in front of gaming consoles with parents taking care of them, so they're not confident about working and being in the world and social skills and dating and, you know, just all those things about being in the world. And this book kind of describes that and describes the research that backs all of that up. So it's definitely a different personality that develops with somebody who's been a hardcore gamer, you know, or a hardcore online person since they were young, through most of childhood. Yeah. And the other book I wanted to recommend is called A General Theory of Love. And that is a wonderful book on neurobiology. And it's beautifully written, but it is it's a book on neuroscience, but it's the neuroscience of attachment and love. And it really talks about how, like Bruce and I are friends. We've been friends now for years. When we hang out together, in both of our brains, there's a release of neurochemicals, and that happens because we feel safe and attuned and cared about within the relationship. And that bouquet of neurochemicals that gets released regulates us, both physiologically and emotionally. You know, we'll be less depressed, less anxious, we'll just feel better because we've hung out with each other. Well, it turns out that for reasons which are still speculative, we don't get that limbic resonance online. Even though we can spend our hours a day chatting and interacting online, the research has been replicated over and over again that we actually become more depressed the more time we spend online. We become dysregulated is the term for it. More depressed and anxious. So, and I think the reason is because you don't experience limbic resonance in that online world. And maybe it's because we need to be able to see and hear and touch and smell each other. You know, we just are animals. We're social animals. And we need that face-to-face, skin-to-skin connection with people. So keep that in mind. It's really important because many people go online in search of social connection, but it takes you away from the real world, which is where you need to be making your social connections.
Do you think that behavior is at risk of evolving out of people once, like the new generation spend more time online and set less of a what I would call a baseline, like you and Bruce have from the beginning first. You know, nowadays relationships and interaction, you know, friends-only relationships sometimes begin online and stay wholly online. So is that type of preference for or physical preference for actual social interaction, physical interaction, at risk of going away?
Yes, I think it is at risk for going away, but I don't think we're going to stop needing it.
Yeah.
I think we'll be dysregulated,
Okay.
but we won't know what it is we're missing. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah.
You?
What did you say the name of that book was?
A General Theory of Love.
A General Theory of Love?
A General Theory of Love. Fabulous book, my favorite nonfiction. Yeah.
Do you know the study that showed that compared personal interactions to online interactions?
I can't name it for you.
Well, I was going to ask about the study.
Well, I can
I'm
tell
sorry.
you the first study that was done.
Okay.
I'll just describe it to you
Okay.
very briefly. You'd have to go searching for it. But what they did is, this was back in the 90s, they took I think it was 100 families that didn't have computers or internet access. They gave them computers and internet access, and they interviewed everyone in the family at the beginning of the study, and then they came back a year later and interviewed them again. And their hypothesis is that people would report greater levels of social satisfaction. You know, because the internet is this great tool for connecting us socially. That's what they expected. What they actually found was contrary to expectation. They found that the more time that was spent online correlated with less time spent with friends and family, and it was strongly positively correlated with reports of depression.
I think for personal and online interaction, I think some of the results would be different if instead of just doing online in general, it was if you did someone's friendship in the personal life and someone's friendship online. Because I think maybe that you'd have similar results. I mean, I only can speak from personal experience, I know a lot of people here have friends that they either first met online or just constantly online friends for years. So maybe that would be a good study.
Well, if you become a researcher, you've got a dissertation topic right there.
Okay, halfway there.
Okay, I think my time is up.
Sure. Any very last questions for Dr. Cash before she leaves today? I just really appreciate your coming in on a consistent way. We really are big fans of video games in this class, and it's good to know that there's potential dark side to this, right? And,
right. My message isn't that video games are bad. My message is that too much is not healthy. That there's a kind of a balance that ideally is struck, so that you have a physically healthy life, a socially healthy life that's outside of video games, and that they just comprise a fun part of a balanced life. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we're at 25 to the hour. Let's go ahead.